my name is Julia Ryder. I currently work as a nurse at Bozeman Health in the emergency department. I don't know exactly everyone who's on the call, but if anyone's in Bozeman, I've been there for 13 years, so they probably know me. I'm taking a long time, but I'm slowly getting my master's of public health and I got certified a couple years ago in environmental health just to work with climate change and human health, which is a passion of mine. So yeah, in my free time, I take care of a little giggly 3-year-old. Yeah, so we can start the talk if that's okay, if everyone's ready. Let's start why we came here tonight. So I want to thank everyone. I know it's evening and I know winter's on the brink. And so I really appreciate that you've taken the time to come and learn and be a part of a solution, because that is definitely the first step. I also want to acknowledge tonight that I'm giving a talk about a target group, ethnic minorities or Black, Indigenous, people of color. And I'm not part of that target group, which you can all see. But I'm going to do my best to explain how climate change affects this group. And can everyone hear me? And my only hope is that from this talk, that you'll be encouraged to reach out to ethnic groups or Black, Indigenous, and people of color more and ask them for more solutions and ideas. So let's begin the talk.
You should see her.
Let's see if I can. And let me just get here. Sorry, Casper, I'm just trying to move. For somehow my screen won't let me move forward. Oh, maybe there we go. Okay. This is a slide most of you guys have probably seen at one point. It's just a representation of our CO2 emissions in the world. I bring this slide out because we all are here because we know that our planet has too many CO2 emissions in our atmosphere, causing temperatures of our planet to rise. I felt this slide was interesting because it separated continents from countries. So if an entire country creates as much CO2 as a continent, that country got its own color on the scale. So as you'll see, Oceania gets its own color, Asia gets its own color because they're continents. Africa has its own color as a continent, same with South America. But there are a few countries where the CO2 emissions are high enough, such as the United States, India, and China, where they actually create enough CO2 emissions to get their own colors. So it was just a representation of what we all know, but it's going to be an important talking point for later in these slides. I think we all can agree that us humans have caused an accelerated rate of climate change and global warming. So this slide is simply to say some important organizations such as NASA, the United States Environmental Protection Agency, and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change all concur that humans are the primary cause of climate change. It's an overwhelming reason. But this talk isn't just about climate change. It's a talk about not all humans contribute the same amount of carbon to the atmosphere equally. And so it's important that we start from this point of view. If you guys want to take a close look here, or I can describe it because sometimes it's hard to read graphs on slides. But while some countries as a whole create more emissions, what's important is how many emissions does each person per country emit? And it looks like the United States is coming in second as countries that lead per person in emissions. So the United States comes in as each person in the United States creates more emissions per person than, say, another country such as South Korea or Japan. And this is from 2021. But let's also pull in income to a carbon footprint. So we know that our carbon footprint is also from which country we're from, but it also is by how much money we make. So from this graph, all I'm trying to show you is if you look at the people in wages, so the people with wages in orange who make the most money also have the highest carbon footprint, which many of us already know, but again, it's very important that we address this. Sadly, in the United States, your income is also determined by your race. I'm going to explain this graph. It does look a little confusing and Zoom might be blocking out some of the the explanations, but if you see the blue color, that is white Americans and the amount of money that they make per household. The burgundy or the dark red color is non-white other minorities. The green is American Indian, and the red line at the very bottom is African American Blacks. And this is how much money you make per race. So now we know that our carbon footprint is affected by what country we live in, by how much money we make, and how much money we make is affected by our race. Why is the reason for this? The reason for this is that the United States has a long history of racism and inequality. For those of us who have never experienced historical racism or any inequality, because most of us are white, this is an example I want to give you. Imagine that you're about to run a race, and a race that will determine the rest of your life and the future of your children's life. But now you're put into a small cage, such as Black-only schools, separated from your parents or your family, or placed on a low-income reservation. All the while, your components, who might be white, are given all the time and resources they need to train. On race day, you get out of your cage and you're too weak and unable to outrun your component who has been able to train for weeks. So that's a simple example of why social inequality and historical inequality of racism in our country has been a problem. I'm going to quickly give you, just so we understand why some people have more privilege than others according to race. So here's a couple of things our country has done that has separated race from having equal opportunity in the United States. Our Constitution was written with 10 articles very intentionally confirming to hold Black people as slaves or as property. Our country broke apart Black families during slavery, sending mothers to one place, fathers to one place, and then children and babies to another place. Our country chose to withhold African Americans the ability to read, so they could not reproduce any of their culture or function well in our literate society to change their own status. The United States removed American Indian children from their homes, taking them as far as possible from anything they knew, and then punishing them if they tried to speak in their own language. We as a country passed laws that were created to maintain legal separation and inequality of whites versus Blacks. Our country manipulated immigration laws so that people of color, particularly Chinese and Mexican, as well as European Jews, were less free to migrate to the United States than Western Eastern Europeans. And our country removed American citizens of Japanese ancestries from their home, then took their land and businesses as their own during World War II. It's not easy to accept that race has caused us harm and that we are causing harm because of our race, because I know none of us here at this presentation genuinely mean to, but we need to talk about why some people are affected more than others. So let's keep talking. The average carbon footprint of the top 1 emitters, which we now know are white American citizens, is 75% higher than the bottom 50%. I gotta change my Zoom screen so I can see some of my slides a little better. So CO2 emissions make us sick. And I know there are some people in this conversation tonight that have seen this very, very helpful diagram, but I'm still going to explain it for those of you who are not familiar with it. This diagram was made by the Centers for Disease and Control and is very helpful in understanding the relationship between climate change and human health. In the very center of the circle, here's my little green dot, you can see that when the Earth heats up, we get, of course, rising temperatures, weather events are extreme, sea levels rise, and overall, there's just a poor air quality of CO2. So what does this cause? This causes, as we all know, extreme heat events, air pollution, changes in vector disease, such as ticks and mosquitoes. We have longer allergy seasons, and our water and our food are highly impacted. And let's look on the outside the circle. From air pollution, we get sick and we get cardiovascular disease. From more ticks and mosquitoes, bad diseases spread, like West Nile virus and Lyme disease. When allergies increase, so does asthma. When water is impacted, we get diarrhea and vomit. Let's be straight up. Water and food supply also is impacted And we don't get as quality food, but we also get malnourishment and malnutrition for those who can't afford the higher or more expensive prices of food. As the environment degrades and people lose homes and floods and wildfires, there's forced migration, which increases civil conflict and mental health problems. As temperatures rise across the world, we get heat-related illnesses, cardiovascular failure, and above all, with all extreme weather events, there's injuries, fatalities, and air pollution. Our country's long-standing history of racism has led to minorities being disproportionately at the front line, and that's why I put this busy slide out there. It's a very busy slide, but I want to bring out, if you guys don't have time to read this while I talk, I'd rather have you listen to me talk. I want to first talk about being on the wrong side of the tracks. It's an old term, but it does come from racial disparity, and it has to do with what is still going on today. Did we know that this disease is caused by climate change? So let's talk about how this happens. The term wrong side of the tracks comes from when the railroad tracks ran through cities and towns. The neighborhoods near or downwinding of the railroad tracks bore the brunt of the noise and the soot from the locomotives. And the people who lived in these areas, or the wrong side of the tracks, were too poor to live anywhere else more pleasant. The New England Journal of Medicine reminds us that this is still true today. Many components of the fossil fuel supply chain and infrastructure in the United States are disproportionately located in communities of color and low-income neighborhoods, thereby creating wrong side of the tracks, or nowadays called riskscapes. These include pipelines and refineries. You might ask, why do the fossil fuel corporations have the ability to build their facilities near where people live? Fossil fuel corporations are amongst the most profitable in history. They have amassed considerable in economic and political power. And like many corporate actors, fossil fuel corporations exercise this political power and extend their continued dominance and profitability, which means when people complain, they can silence the people. In the middle of this, here's my little circle on the brown area. This is called, we're going to talk about sacrifice zones, which is also considered wrong side of the tracks, but to a worser level. Sacrifice zones are areas of land, water, or racially devalued bodies where pollution is deposited in areas of concentrated harm. These zones are absolutely essential to the fossil fuel economy because they need a place to dump their waste and their toxins. So these waste areas are heavily polluted and damaged, and those who live near them are at risk for elevated health risk. And the fossil fuel companies state a supposed greater good of economic progress, which means elevated health risk for the greater good so we can have economic progress in our country. Essentially, what is being said from this whole slide is, do some lives matter more than others? For this reason, some communities in our city and friend circles are more likely to get sick from climate change because they are placed on the front lines of what is causing climate change. Another very busy slide. And all I want to show you is this slide does begin to talk about solutions that we can do as community members. I'm going to point out that communities of color, again, are often on the front lines or at risk areas, and our cities can make adaptation plans that consider these communities. We also understand that low-income communities don't have resources to leave their homes when floods or toxin levels get too high. And so cities need to start considering disaster management that will improve resiliency for people with low resources. And as all of us know, older adults and children are also at higher risk with climate change. The Lancet Medical Journal states, capitalism dynamics have produced severe global inequities, with centers of wealth and capital accumulation characterized by high amounts of consumption and energy use, hindering the ability of some populations to meet their basic needs. Long-standing racist policies and procedures, such as residential segregation, unequal education opportunities, and limited prospects for economic advancement, have led to increased vulnerability of the Black community to climate change impacts, and by extension, other global crises that can emerge. David Lammy is on the Parliament of the UK, and he is African American. He says it the best. From London to Lagos to LA, Black Americans are exposed to 56% more pollution than they cause. White Americans breathe 17% less air pollution than they produce. Currently, we all can agree now that climate change is a social justice issue. We cannot solve one problem without solving the other problem. So let us change the scenario that some lives matter more, that all lives matter. For many of us, we're all in Montana. I know there's a few people not from Montana on this talk, but being in Montana, I think it's important that we understand that this social justice issue occurs here in Montana as well. Carbon emissions in Montana, let me go here for a second. Carbon emissions in Montana in 2021 total about 25.8 metric tons per person. That number doesn't seem that important. Kind of seems obscure. But when you start talking about Montana has a low population compared to the rest of the United States, and it ranks as the 6th highest per person emissions among the whole US, we now know that Montana has a very large carbon footprint for how few people are in it. Another important talking point I want to bring up is that for a state with such a large carbon footprint, we are 85% white. This is a representation of what people of color and African American and Indigenous people represent in Montana. About 6% of all Montanans are American Indian, 4.3% are Hispanic Latino, 1% are Asian Pacific Islanders, and about 0.6% are African American. I'm first going to talk about the two most dominant Black, Indigenous, and people of color that make up the population in Montana. I bring up this slide, and again, it's very busy, so feel free just to look at the photos and just feel free to listen to what I am going to tell you. Because this fact is very, very important to learn about. Indigenous people in our country or in our world make up less than 5% of the world population. But through their activism and their political involvement, they have protected over 80% of the Earth's biodiversity. That's a very, very important point to make for a culture that has been so minimized. For centuries, traditional Indigenous practices have preserved forests, deserts, grasslands, and marine environments. And these are all places that we value and we love. On the Hispanic side, in Montana, there has been a steadily increased reliance on foreign agricultural workers. And it turns out that these workers are mostly Hispanic Latino. According to the Office of Foreign Labor Certification in the Federal Department, in 2012, there were 480 certified foreign worker positions. And each year since then, it has increased. In 2013, the number jumped. In 2014, the same number rose to 575. In 2015, the number rose to over 600. And then in 2017, the number rose to almost 800. And it continues to rise today of our use of foreign workers, mostly Hispanic Latino. How are these communities affected by climate change? Reduction in rainfall and the continuous experiences of prolonged drought affect soil quality and ranching and the agricultural practices of American Indians. This is important because when you live on a reservation, you may not have other resources for work or for economic value. Tribes across the United States are also experiencing reduction in access to culturally important habitats and species. And I need to remind you why this is important. Culturally important habitats and species to them is like taking away the Pope or the Catholic Church from a Catholic person. Or if you're Christian, not being able to own a Bible. This is very much a part of their belief system and how they identify as a people. Two national studies spanning from 1999 to 2018 found that the American Indians and Alaska Natives had the highest mortality rate associated with the extreme cold compared to whites. This also might sound confusing because they live in Alaska, But you have to remember, the people most affected by extreme temperatures are those with the least amount of resources. If you don't have the money to pay for heat, or a home with insulation, or a vehicle to drive you to a hospital, you are going to suffer more from the effects of extreme temperatures. As I explained earlier, especially in Montana, Hispanics are overrepresented in Montana in industries with heat-related mortalities, including agriculture and construction. And the important thing to remember about the work that our Hispanics, Latino communities do, it is full of toxins, whether it's spraying for weeds, working in a meat factory, or working in construction. But when there's heat included in toxins, heat is found to increase the dermal absorption and the pulmonary effect that chemicals have in their toxicity. This compounds the risk of illness associated with hazards and substances amongst our Latino and Hispanic workers. A study outside of Montana in Washington found that Latinos were disproportionately impacted by heat-related illnesses across all industries. And again, another national study found that heat-related death among our Hispanic and Latino construction workers, particularly those born in Mexico, were much higher when compared to non-white. We're talking about workers that may not be American citizens, maybe undocumented workers that were taken advantage of. But we're also talking about the people who are finding whatever jobs they can, the lowest paying jobs, and then put on the front lines to do the work we don't want to do. And our CO2 emissions from heat is also a reason that these people are dying. The other minorities we have in Montana include our African American and our Asian American communities. And just like our American Indians and our Hispanic Latinos, they are all at risk for heat-related illnesses if they're non-white. So a little bit more research, it's all busy, but what it does explain is that heat exposure has been affecting those of Black, Indigenous, and people of color across the United States, because these people cannot afford air conditioners. They live in areas of poor ventilation. They also live in areas with high traffic, where when pollution's higher, so is heat. We call a lot of times, we know about like a food desert. So it's the same with heat, that heat tends to be higher in cities or in places where there's multiple people packed into one place. So the lower income people or minorities are having higher heat-related illnesses. And here's why we are all here today. And I appreciate you being with me up until this point, because I know some of that information makes us feel bad, but we're here because we can make a difference. And you guys have already made a difference by showing up to this conversation today. You're here and you're educating yourself. And that's the most important thing that we can do as a privileged community. When you are taking action, make sure you research on local and federal policies that are designed to perpetrate the differences in equality in the first place. It is very important for us to always realize that even with majority environmental groups, leadership tends to be middle class and whites. Be careful not to blindly assume that any environmental organization and policymakers are involved in climate justice as much as they are in climate justice. I'll go back to this for one more time, because there's a woman, the co-executive director of climate justice, Alana Ozwana Benshi Albert, and I probably completely mispronounced her name, but she's an American Indian who lives in Oklahoma. And she says, you cannot rely on the people who cause the problem to fix the problem. So one of the important things is to fix a problem is we need to help raise the voices of impacted communities. And as healthcare professionals, we have this power. Our voices are often heard, and we can share the voice of communities who are not being heard. It's also important for us to be familiar with cultural norms for our patients and those of us who work in healthcare, so our patients know what resources they have to care for themselves, whether it's heat or cold or lack of water or lack of clean water. We need to be able to educate our patients on how to keep safe from chemicals and poor air quality, and advocate for them to find jobs that can give them that. We need to ask our hospitals to become organizations and our clinics to advocate for environmental justice. And we need to join organizations that promote equality for all. For those of us in this talk who are in healthcare, we need to share with our patients response planning that they can have and talk about it with them before things happen, such as the wildfire that happened right here in Bozeman, the flooding that took out half of Montana couple summers ago. We also need to recognize that some of our patients on the front lines cannot make average medical appointments. So we need to schedule times and appointments for patients with minimal resources when they're not working, such as maybe a Saturday morning here and there. We can teach and encourage our patients to evaluate indoor pollutants as well as outdoor pollutants, and how patients can avoid, when there's high wildfire smoke in Montana, how to avoid poor air quality. And it's also very important that if we don't know the language our patient speaks, that we use qualified interpreters so our patients feel safe communicating and understanding medical information. And for all of us, whether we're healthcare providers or not, we're all community members. We must remember that above all, we need to continue to give voice to those who are on the front lines. Indigenous people themselves play a huge role in combating climate change, but are rarely considered in public discourse. The United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues is well placed to support Indigenous people in putting a human face on the issue, and we need to follow by example. We need to vote to put those most affected by climate change in leadership positions. It is important for us to examine the role that an individual citizens can play in dismantling structural racism, especially at a local level. And this means for us doing things like this today and talking about it and discussing it and sharing our newfound knowledge. Always stay informed about local environmental issues in your community. And when issues do come up, maybe about land use, plans, policy, design, enforcement, and grant awards, be the voice that advocates for social justice issues to be a priority and the decision concerning social justice to be made transparent for the entire community. And this slide, the number one thing, always check what you believe. And then research social justice issues locally and nationally. When you can, partner and be a part of local organizations, participate in your community, and create awareness through social media. If you need a protest, stand up and protest. We only get one chance. Volunteer and donate when you can. And then the most unsexy thing I know is political, but that is where change is made. If you don't want to have a political voice, at least vote for those who support not just climate change, but social justice. And look at my time real fast. It's about 30 minutes, so I do have time to talk about some success stories. I hope I did not talk too fast for anybody. But some success stories. I'm going to first bring up a Montana success story that I loved. Let me find this real quick here. I had to write it down because it's a little bit long and I just learned about it today. But in Montana, there's an Indigenous Food Sovereignty Initiative being put out. And this involves Indigenous young professionals and elder mentors. And their approach is they are going to, through diverse perspectives and cultural knowledge, multiple tribes are coming together to regrow traditional foods in Montana. They're going beyond just healthy eating, and they're also acknowledging cultural significance of specific foods, and then also emphasizing preservation and sustainability through the growth of foods. So in Montana alone, we have our Indigenous population making change in agriculture. Nationwide, I have some fun examples of Indigenous, but also people of color communities that are making huge change in our world. Organizations such as ACTS, which is ACTS, which is a center which center the needs of Black and Indigenous people and people of color, making strides in climate action. Their efforts range from advancing strict truck pollution regulation in California to pushing the government to adopt all government approaches to supporting equal outcomes, partnering with labor leaders to help Oregon pass the sweeping Oregon Climate Action Plan. The Climate and Clean Energy Equity Fund doesn't only help groups with energy or climate agenda, but it funds organizations with track records of success in social justice issues, including Immigration is a social justice issue. Labor, housing, and reproductive rights. In the United States, in the southern area, the Hive Fund for Climate and Gender Justice is another intermediary spurring new approaches to philanthropy. Launched in 2019 with $12 million in seed, it supports organizations primarily led by women of color and other frontlines that are taking on big players like the fossil fuel industry that run oil refineries and petrochemical plants that pollute air and endanger the health of neighboring communities. And let's see what I can do here. It's a shorter talk, probably than expected, but above all, I want to continue to say thank you for caring and thank you for paying attention and for being a part of this important topic. We cannot solve climate change until we solve social inequities that go along with climate change. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julia. That was beautiful. I want to give folks time for questions for Julia. Real quick, again, I just want to mention that if you intend to claim continuing education, I've just posted a link in the chat to our post survey, and I will email folks who signed up for this to complete that as well. But please get that link while you can, and you can also go to our website to sign up for our newsletter and see what we're doing on this and other issues around climate in Montana. And we just launched our Montana Climate Steward program. So if you're interested in supporting climate action within your own profession, we have ways to help you do that at our website as well. And I'll cede the floor to, I think Rob has his hand up. So thanks, everybody.
Okay, thanks, Caspin, and thanks, Julia. That was absolutely superb. And I just want to point out, and I will, as I just put it in the chat, except I don't think the links came across. I'll put the links in there. Yesterday, the National Climate Assessment 5 was publicly released after about 4 years in work and developing that. And today, the Lancet Countdown and Lancet Countdown US briefs were both public released. And they very much emphasize and support what Julia said. And that is that, one, there's a lot we can do. We can make a difference, but we have to be very attentive to the environmental and social justice aspects of it so that we're not hurting some people more who've already been put at high risk.
Thank you. That's very exciting. I hope you guys can look at those links because those are very, very interesting and valuable organizations. It's a lot of food for thought, I understand. But would anyone else like to inquire about anything that they noticed or stood out to them in the talk?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you bet.
Okay.
Yep.
So this is Kathy down in Dillon. I recently retired, but you know, it's very hard to grapple against, I don't want to be mean, but to say the good old boys
Yep.
that are in our small town. And even our governor, Gianforte, that keeps pressing, you know, the fossil fuels so that people don't lose their jobs, you know, in eastern Montana, or just even the people that you try to elect don't get in. And so it's like an uphill battle, you know, and the state of the world right now, it's just a little bit mind-boggling that people can't even change stuff around here too much with all the national and international stuff that's going on everywhere else. And so, you know, I keep trying to see ways to get in to, you know, to vote for something. And so I pay attention to what Nature Conservancy is doing and, you know, those kind of groups. to see how they best can help it. You're so right, about the social injustice. I mean, if to try to change that is a big one. The big one.
Kathy, I want to say I really admire that you have your perspective in a town like Dillon, because I understand that rural populations aren't able to think on that world view of the connection between the climate, people, and change. But there is one thought I have for you that might encourage you. They always say, look, where you look is where your actions follow.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of looking at Gianforte or the Good Old Boys, I would encourage you to look on the indigenous activist groups in Montana, because they are doing so much. Instead of trying to take power away, and Casman, I see, yeah, let's do it. Casman has a thought in just a second, and Casman can add to this. Instead of trying to get power away from a political system that is very much opposite of this, give your power to an organization that could use your power. And so you can fight as a team versus individually, if that makes sense. Whether it's indigenous or Hispanics, there's more groups. And Casman, why don't you add what you were just thinking?
Yeah, just 100% to add on to that. I believe every tribe in the state has a climate action plan. I know for certain that the Salish and Kootenai tribe in the Flathead does. And those folks are incredible environmental leaders. They developed the first tribally owned wilderness and have just incredible environmental things to add to the conversation. And they can be powerful. So yeah, just to add on to what Julia said, some folks that I know who are doing incredible work there. Yeah.
Good. Thank you very much.
Yeah, go meet your people and help them fight the battle, and don't worry about those other guys, because eventually you're going to have little small wins with the right group.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can add to that as well, the other thing that can make a difference, and one of the things that many or most of us are very bad at, and that is talking with our friends and family. That's the hardest group to talk with, and it's not to be adversarial, though it sometimes feels like that's how we're going to be, but just to have conversations over coffee or tea or whatever, that of things that make a difference to us. And we all tend to shy away from that, but that's what can make a difference, is talking with those friends and family.
That's very true. Emily.
Hello, hi, I'm at work, sorry.
No, thanks for
yeah, there's a
joining.
lot, yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of good information there. Julia, you did a great job. But I just wanted to add to, like, even with the youth activism, especially with climate change with the state of Montana, that's a huge win for, our youth, because my biggest thought is, what planet are we going to leave for others? And then also going back, I grew up in a very rural place in Idaho. I grew up in Blackfoot, Idaho. And so I deal a lot with a lot of, like hunters, and like having communications like with like the Rocky Mountain Elk Fund and a lot of other like wildlife. We have the same goal. We just go about it in different ways. You can always find common ground, even with people that are very much involved in like things like, but that's the beauty of being human. Like if we were all the same, it'd be awful, but you can always find a common ground with people in discussing climate change, especially a lot of people dealing with like, elk refuge. I know wolves are kind of, but go wolves. But you can always find a lot of people, even if you have different political views, different thought process, you can always meet in the middle. And, the end game is the same. We want a healthy, happy planet. And so just, not writing people off the second that they're like, I don't care if you have a Trump hat on, I don't agree with it, but we both want elk to be happy. I've had a lot of conversations like that in my hometown, and I see that a lot in Montana, especially like Kathy's and Dillon. Just finding little victories is what keeps me going. So
Emily, I love that, because so many of the solutions to climate change are community. bringing communities together, because right now we all feel so separated from one another. But I just thank you for sharing that, because we all are sharing the same planet. We don't inherit the planet, we borrow the planet from our children, and I very much appreciate that community is a great solution, and it's a fun solution. I think we all thrive with a strong community.
Yeah.
Thank you,
I
Emily.
think
That was
I think just
beautiful.
connecting with what's important, like you said,
Yep.
I think that's huge. So
Great input. Thank you for sharing that. You guys have great thoughts. I'd love to, if anyone has anything else, I'm sure would only add.
So Julia, actually, can we ask of the attendees if folks are aware of positive things that are happening in their area, particularly in the public health aspect, since you emphasized it. The NCA 5 emphasized it, and the Lancet report today emphasized it, that we have to address health when talking about climate change, or because the impacts are so dramatic. But love to hear from folks about things that are happening around Montana or elsewhere.
You do. Let's see. Posting.
Hi, this is Anna. Can you hear me?
Yeah, can hear you, Anna.
Hi. You are totally right. There's a lot of Native American, we call them tribal units, that have their own climate change and their own ability to practice what caring for their environment in a different way than a lot of people understand about. And it's always, it was interesting to me, and I just sent a chat about the fact that we are increasing diversity in the state of Montana, and people who are used to, extreme heat, they get both extreme heat here sometimes with agriculture during the summer, and then extreme cold during the winter. And that's entirely different than a lot of other population areas. And I'm not sure, I haven't heard of anyone that's really looking at that totally.
That's very, very good point. There's a very extreme to our temperatures here. And so you almost need resources, for both, right? You need the ability
Correct.
to survive in the cold, and you need the ability to cool down in the heat. And often it's, those can be expensive resources, such as air conditioner or heating
Exactly.
a home. It's very, very great point.
There are a
And
number of
there's-
things being done, especially with the heat that's come on in the last couple of years. A lot of the towns are now looking at providing cooling centers. People are looking more at the urban heat island effects and looking to plant more trees within cities. For instance, Billings just got a $1 to $2 million grant to plant more trees in the lower income districts of town, because it actually makes a significant difference for heat. So there's definitely people thinking on these lines.
That's exciting.
Yeah, but the thing
Go
is we
Billings.
don't need cooling centers here in Montana. Where are you going to go to catch them? And unless you're in the bigger cities, there's no way they have cooling centers at an agricultural site unless you make sure that you put that in for your workers. And that's what I'm talking about. Do
Oh,
you know
yep.
do you understand what I'm saying?
Yep.
Right,
Yep.
right. Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah. But as far as, with your high risk people in the communities, and there are some small communities that have identified, like cooling centers and stuff. So it is an important thing to do as we look at mitigation and adaptation to climate.
Yeah, Zonta is I'm a member of Zonta Club of Billings, and we do a lot of things related to climate change, and I'm on their committee. So along with being a native, so I'm familiar with a lot of things. I just am not that involved in, and you made me feel like I need to be more involved there.
We can always be more involved is my learning.
Yeah.
But you know, I think I have a little girl, and so my thought process is always, how do I teach her about this? And sometimes it's just every day just doing one good thing. It's not just an action, it's a lifestyle, right? It's how
Yep.
you think minute to minute and caring about one another, you know. So we just talked about community and erasing color and figuring out how to share resources. Those are huge projects, but it's just little tiny actions at a time, you know. And as we just talked about too, our youth is definitely going to be important.
Yeah, for sure.
Anything else for anybody? I really appreciate the insight, and the comments mean a lot. And again, I know we all feel like we're in it together and sometimes alone, but we're not.
Thank you. This was a really good presentation. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks for being a part of it.
Yes. I
I'm
enjoyed it
happy
as
to-
well.
I'm happy to share my slides as well. Like I said, our main goal is to share information and pass it on. And I have all the citations and references. So I'll put my email in the chat screen. And if anyone would like the presentation, I would love to keep any of that information going around. It's definitely an open conversation.
And Julia, we'll also post it to the Montana HPHC website.
Oh, good.
As well. So
Okay.
that's the other thing I wanted to point out, and it goes back to Kathy, some of the things you said earlier, and a little bit what you said, Julia, as well as I believe it was Anna. One of the, not one, but several of the organizations that do a lot of work, not specific to climate change, though that's part of it sometimes, but a lot of the resource councils around the state. For example, in our area, it's Northern Plains Resource Council, but there are a variety of others. And the resource councils have people from all walks of life, ranchers, urban dwellers, professionals, a variety of others, and they focus on some specific issues that are common to all of them. And that's a good resource because you see people, you see conservatives, you see liberals, people from all different political backgrounds coming together to identify or for problems that they have identified and then finding ways to work on it. And a lot of it is policy level issues, but those are good options if you look in your area to see what resource councils are there.
Okay, I do know something about that, but I most certainly can look that up. This is Anna, by the way.
A couple of resources that that we have, and some of you on the call have already taken advantage of it. One, I think less than half of you all are have subscribed to the Montana Health Professionals, so we hope that you do that. It's montanahphc.org. But on our site, there is a section that says "Get Involved," and we have we've been working to get more places in Montana to put the air quality to fly the air quality flags, and it helps people know in the community that our health is related to air pollution. We've gotten the flags onto, I think, all the reservations so far. We have about 56 sites, but we also have a beautiful set of floor banners that are rotating around the state. They're up at the Salish Kootenai tribes right now. And we ship them to you for free, and they stay in your facility for a month. So we've had it in some of the health departments like Riverstone and the Butte community health centers. And so we would love to have your site too. Look at them online and see if it's something you might be interested in. It's an easy way to start letting maybe conservative communities know that we have these concerns as health professionals. I'm curious on this call, is there anyone that's at a health facility where they are or have looked at issues like air pollution or the heat issues, the wildfire smoke issues? You may not have done anything yet because we're all so lacking in resources and money, but at least thinking along those lines. Has there been any conversations where you all work?
Hi everyone, my name is Jenna and I'm with Riverstone Health. And I've worked with Lori on a number of things. We've housed the banners that she was just speaking about in response to, I think it was 2022, the flooding. Our community in Billings was like, oh, climate, yeah. And so it kind of led senior leadership at our at Riverstone to see what options there are. And I would say primarily the route we're taking is emergency preparedness and emergency response, because I think what has associated best with our community is the admiration for our environment and where we live. And when flooding or wildfire smoke or extreme weather events prevent us from doing what we want with our time, then suddenly, people start to take notice. And so we try to take advantage of that and use that as an opportunity to start speaking a little bit more about weather and really just being prepared for things as a result of climate events that are inevitable. And so we're currently working on a climate primer that'll kind of be representative of Yellowstone County. And we also are working with both Byrons to get a didactics course together for our residency program for the first year residents. So we're really trying to do what we can with the resources that we have to just kind of get those conversations started, to make sure that people are aware that climate and health at the very least are related, whether or not we are telling you how to vote with that information. That's not the case, but just, having the conversation that climate and health are linked, and then responding as a health agency, because that's really what we're here to do.
Mhm. Yeah, it's good.
I love that, Jenna. Thank you. And thank you to Riverstone. That's wonderful. Okay. If there aren't any more comments, I do want to put the link for the continuing education out here once again on the chat. If you haven't found the chat, you can go to the three dots that say more at least on my screen, it's the lower right-hand side, and you can find the chat there. If you want to have continuing ed from this, please fill that out. I want to say thank you to the Area Health Education Center in Montana for their support with this, and to Confluence for co-sponsoring this with us. They're both wonderful organizations, and I hope you'll check them out as well. And a huge thank you to Julia for all she does for us, and especially for her talk today, and to all of you for coming. It's so exciting to see you all here and to know that we're all in this together. So thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Deeply appreciate it.